So my favorite part about Faithwalking is hearing the stories. And we hear great stories, and we hear them on a pretty regular basis. And that never gets old. Maybe the best part is when I go to a retreat or I meet someone and they say, I'm doing Faithwalking because my dad did it and he's really different. Or I'm doing Faithwalking because my husband came to one of these and he's changed, and I want to see what this is all about. And that's probably the most exciting thing that happens. In Faithwalking, we're pretty clear that we're about transformation. But that's kind of a cliche, it's overused. And the truth is that we really long for God to bring deep change into our lives. And the truth is that that really happens. People's lives really are changed. So I don't want to imply that it's magic. We don't have any magic, but that, with hard work and a community around us and lots of God's grace, we really believe that if we make ourselves available to God in different ways, that God will work deeply in our lives, and that's our experience. We really believe that God is calling ordinary people to make a difference in the world, to join Him in doing that. And we're also really convinced that we're not making the difference we wish we were. We want to see God's kingdom come through His people, but the reality is that we often don't have that kind of impact. And I think what we're aware of is that the problem is not out there. It's not that we don't have enough people, or that we don't have enough money, or that we don't have enough good ideas. The problem is usually in here, that we can't get along with each other, that we're pretty chronically angry, or we're fearful, that we don't go deep with God, that we don't have the trust, to actually step out and walk by faith. And so in Faithwalking, we're looking at those really deep places in ourselves, to look at how they developed and what it's going to take for us to live differently. Most of us at this place in our lives, we're not shaking our fist at God and saying, I am not going to follow you. I am not going to do things your way. It's just that, at some time in our lives, sometimes way back when, we learned to be afraid, or we learned not to trust God. We learned to be angry. And so it's that we can't be obedient to God in the ways that we would like to be, because we're angry, or we're scared, or we're full of mistrust. A lot of what I grew up with was that Nike commercial form of faith that said, just do it. And the truth was, if I could just do it, I would have done it. I couldn't. I was obeying God as much as I knew how to obey God. I was following as closely as I knew how to follow. But by looking at some of those patterns of fear or anger or mistrust, or whatever it was that developed, and offering that to God, God brings healing and a different way of life. And, one of the ways that happened in my life, I was able to see a pattern going back to being a girl. My parents loved me really, really well, but you leave home and, I found out that the rest of the world didn't necessarily feel that way about me, and especially other kids. I was kind of intense and a little awkward, and I didn't know how to fit in, and I didn't know how to make friends. And there were several years in there where I was really aware of that, because the messages I was getting from other kids were literally, you are so weird. Why are you that way? Why are you so weird? And I know a lot of kids go through that, but for me, that was really painful. And I learned, not to be myself, that myself was weird. And I learned to fit in at any cost, and to do what it took to fit in and to get approval, to belong, which was fine at the time. I mean, that wasn't all bad. But at the same time, it meant not being myself, not being the self even that God had created me to be, but living inauthentically. And of course, that continued into being an adult. That wasn't just when I was 11 years old. Here I was an adult and letting an 11-year-old run my life. And so looking at that and looking hard at that and saying, I learned some things when I was a child about myself and about the world and about God that are not necessarily true. And I can let those go, and I can learn different things, and I can learn differently, live differently. I kind of renounced the idea that fitting in was the most important thing in my life, and started to practice, with my coach and with the small group of people around me, started to practice being braver, starting to practice being more myself, practicing being the person God created me to be and was calling me to be. And when it comes down to it, I had not thought of myself as a selfish person. I didn't mean to be selfish, but I was spending so much energy living so self-protectively that it really had become all about me. And this work that God has done in my life, I think, has really freed me to love others and to love them more fully. And that's really the bottom line for us at Faithwalking. I mean, I want to be clear that we want people to flourish. I want people to be, all that they can be. But we're not just looking for God to heal us so that we'll be happier or we'll be healthier. We really believe that God wants to heal us in part for the sake of others. That God wants us to have such a deep love for people, especially people on the margins, that He wants us to learn more fully how to love, our neighbor, how to love the stranger, how to love our enemies, how to love our families and our communities, and, basically like He taught us how to love each other the way that God intended. And for me, that's what faith walking is all about.